The night Piper Callahan walked into the wrong waiting room, she had blood on her scrubs, a cracked phone screen, and exactly 4 minutes before her shift technically ended. She didn't notice him at first. That was the thing nobody would believe later. That she had walked right past Rowan Maddox, sat down 3 chairs away from him, and pulled out her phone to text her roommate about whether they had any leftover soup in the fridge, because that was the kind of night it had been. Not the kind where you clock danger, the kind where you clock calories and whether your feet will ever stop hurting. The waiting room on the 4th floor of Mercy General was quieter than the ER downstairs. Beige walls, flickering fluorescent tube in the far corner, a coffee machine that had been out of order since March. Piper had come up here to avoid Dr. Fenwick, who had a habit of finding nurses who were technically off shift and assigning them things that were technically someone else's problem. She was scrolling through her messages when she heard it. A sound so controlled it barely registered as pain. A slow exhale through the nose, the kind of breath you learn when you don't want anyone to know you're hurting. She looked up. The man in the corner chair was tall, even sitting down. She could tell by the way his knees pressed against the low table in front of him. Dark suit, no tie, collar open at the throat, one hand resting on his thigh with deliberate stillness, the other pressed flat against his left side. His face was turned toward the window, jaw set, eyes tracking something outside that wasn't there. On the empty chair beside him sat a jacket folded too precisely. Beneath it, if you knew what to look for, and Piper did, was the shape of pressure applied to a wound. "That's not a bruise," she said. He turned his head slowly. His eyes were the color of deep water, the kind with no visible bottom, and they assessed her the way a person assesses a room when they enter it. Exits first, then threats, then everything else. "Excuse me. The way you're sitting." She nodded toward his side. "Left intercostal. You're protecting it. That's not a bruise." A pause. Not surprise. Something more calculated than that. "You a doctor, nurse?" She stood up, crossed to him, crouched down before he could object. "Can I look?" He didn't answer, but he didn't stop her. She lifted the edge of his shirt, and her face stayed neutral the way 4 years of her nursing had trained it to. Deep laceration, already sutured, badly, along the lower left rib cage. The stitches were uneven, pulled too tight in places, and the skin around them was the particular red that precedes serious infection. "Who did this?" "A friend. Your friend needs to retake basic suture technique." She sat back on her heels. "This is going to open, probably tonight." "It's fine. It's not fine." She looked up at him. "You need to be admitted." Something shifted in his expression. Not quite amusement. Something quieter. "That's not going to happen." Piper had heard that exact sentence approximately 340 times in her career. Drug mules, domestic violence victims, men who had driven themselves to the hospital with 2 broken wrists because they didn't want to explain how. She recognized the shape of it, the refusal that wasn't really about pride, it was about something larger and more dangerous that lived outside the hospital walls. She should have walked away. Her shift was over. He was conscious, coherent, and had clearly received some form of care already, however inadequate. She looked at him for 1 more second. "Wait here," she said. She came back 8 minutes later with a suture kit, antiseptic, fresh gauze, and a coffee from the nurse's station that she handed to him without comment. He took it without comment. That felt like the beginning of something, though she couldn't have said what. "This is going to hurt," she said, snapping on gloves. "Everything does." She worked in silence for a while. He was still, unnervingly still, the way that people are still when they've learned not to flinch. She had known soldiers like that, abuse survivors. People who had spent years making their bodies into something that didn't react. "You're not going to ask me why," he said. "No." Another silence. "Most people ask." "Most people," Piper said, cutting a suture with more precision than his friend had managed, "aren't trying to do a clean job." When she was done, she stripped her gloves and dropped them in the bin by the door. He had put his shirt back down. The coffee was half empty. "Piper Callahan," she said, not extending her hand because they were past handshakes now. "And I'm going to need you to not come back here, because if you do, I'll have to report it." He looked at her with that same unreadable depth. "Rowan Maddox," he said, "and I make no promises." She didn't think about him for 3 days. That was a lie. She thought about him in the margins of things, between patient handoffs, while she was making oatmeal at 7 in the morning, once at 2 in the afternoon, when a man in a dark coat walked past the ER bay doors, and her head turned before her brain caught up. But she didn't expect to see him again. People like that didn't come back. They disappeared into whatever world had produced them. Then, on a Tuesday, she found an envelope in her locker. Inside was a single card. No logo, no return address, in clean, precise handwriting. "You didn't ask," I noticed. RM, and below that, a phone number. Piper stood in the locker room for a long time, holding the card. Her roommate Delia would have told her to throw it away. Her mother would have told her to call the police, the version of herself that had existed 5 years ago. Before nursing school, before the night her brother Colt had called her from a parking lot in Memphis, saying he needed help, and she had driven 4 hours through a thunderstorm to get to him. That version would have agreed with both of them. But that wasn't the version of herself she was anymore. She put the card in her pocket. She didn't call the number, not yet. She did something else instead. She went home and did what Colt had taught her to do when something didn't add up. She pulled out her laptop and started looking. Rowan Maddox. The name surfaced almost nothing in public records, which was itself a kind of answer. A man that age, that polished, that careful, who existed in nearly no searchable form, had not achieved that by accident. There was a Maddox Holdings LLC registered in Delaware, a shell inside another shell. There was a photo from a charity gala 4 years ago, in which a man who might have been him stood at the edge of the frame, half turned away from the camera. There was no criminal record, but absence wasn't innocence. Piper knew that too. She closed the laptop and sat in the dark for a while. Then she texted the number. "Your stitches need to be checked in 10 days. PC. The reply came back under a minute. "I know a place. I'll send a car." She almost typed, "I'll drive myself." But some instinct she couldn't fully name yet, made her pause. If she drove herself, she controlled the location. If she took his car, she controlled something else. The signal. That she wasn't afraid, that she wasn't playing games, that she had chosen this with her eyes open. "Fine," she sent back. She put the phone down and went to make dinner, and her hands were completely steady, which she took as a good sign. The car was a black SUV with tinted windows, and a driver who introduced himself only as Mr. Foster's and offered her water from a built-in console cooler with the manner of someone who did not expect to be questioned. The route took her across the river and into a part of the city where the buildings were older and the streets narrower. The kind of neighborhood that had been something different 3 decades ago and was now something harder to name. They stopped in front of a restaurant she'd never heard of. No sign. Just a door and 2 men on either side of it who clocked her in a single sweep and then stepped back. Inside, it was warm and quiet and smelled of rosemary and wood smoke. Rowan Maddox was already at a corner table. Of course he was, with his back to the wall and a clear line of sight to every entrance. He stood when she approached, which surprised her. "Nurse Callahan, Mr. Maddox," she sat down. "How's the side? Functional, that's not what I asked." The ghost of something crossed his face. "Healing," he said, "better than it was." A waiter appeared and poured water and disappeared again with the silent efficiency of someone very well paid. Piper unfolded her napkin and studied the man across from her. Up close, with better lighting and without the context of emergency and blood, he was different. Not less dangerous, more, maybe, but differently so. There were lines around his eyes that suggested either chronic stress or chronic sleeplessness, probably both. His hands, wrapped around his water glass, were the hands of someone who worked. Not in any office job sense, but in the older sense. He had done things with those hands. "I want to know what you are," she said. Direct. She had decided on direct. He didn't flinch from it. "You already looked. I found very little. That's intentional, I know." She held his gaze. "I want to hear it from you." A pause, not the calculating kind. The kind where a person is deciding not what to say, but whether to stop pretending. I run certain operations in this city, he said carefully. Distribution, protection, dispute resolution among parties who can't access conventional legal systems. Us? You're telling me you're a criminal? I'm telling you what I do. His voice didn't shift. Whether you call it criminal depends on which side of the table you were born on. It should have frightened her. She catalogued the fact that it didn't. Not because she was naive. She had worked at Trauma Bay for 4 years. She had held the hands of people who had been on the receiving end of men exactly like this, but because fear was not the thing she felt. What she felt was something more like recognition, the shape of a world she had been adjacent to her whole life without quite knowing its name. My brother, she said, went to federal prison when I was 22. 3 years. He ran numbers for an organization in Nashville that I didn't know about until the day the FBI knocked on my mother's door. She picked up her water glass. I'm not shocked by you, Mr. Maddox. I'm just deciding whether I want to be here. He was quiet for a long moment. And? Piper set down the glass. The food smells good. I'll stay for dinner. She stayed for dinner, and then she stayed for the next 6 weeks in the only way that made sense, at the edges in the periphery. The way you stand near a fire when you're cold but haven't decided yet if it's safe. He sent her books. That surprised her most. Not flowers, not expensive things, books, with small notes tucked inside them that referenced passages she hadn't read yet, as if he had read her interests the way he read everything else. Precisely, without asking first. She started going to the restaurant on Thursday evenings. They talked about things that had nothing to do with who he was. A documentary she'd seen about migratory birds, the architecture of the hospital's oldest wing, whether the city was better in summer or winter, her, summer, him, a long silence that she eventually decided meant winter. She learned that he had grown up in Baton Rouge, that he had a sister he spoke of carefully and not often, that he drank his coffee with nothing in it and had an irrational fondness for terrible weather. She learned other things without being told, that the 2 men who sat at the bar every Thursday were not there for the food, that the call he sometimes stepped away to take always happened at the same time, never longer than 4 minutes, that once. Just once. He came in with a split lip that he did not acknowledge, and she did not ask about, but she touched his wrist lightly when she left, and he looked at that point of contact for a moment longer than was casual. She was not falling in love with him. She told herself this with some regularity. She was fascinated by him, which was different, which was the thing she told herself was different, and she had always had a weakness for systems, for the logic beneath surfaces, and Rowan Maddox was a system she had not finished understanding. Then November came, and everything changed. It was Delia who found her. Piper had been working a double. 12 hours into it, running on vending machine coffee, and the particular focused calm of a body that had moved past exhaustion into something functional and hollow. When Delia appeared at the ER entrance in her winter coat, face tight in a way that cut through the fog immediately. "There are men outside your apartment building," Delia said. "I came home and they were just standing there, 2 of them. One of them asked me if I knew Piper Callahan." The floor of Piper's stomach dropped. "What did you say?" "I said I'd never heard of you and went to my friend Keisha's." Delia grabbed her arm. "Piper! What is going on?" She thought of 6 weeks of Thursday evenings, of books with handwritten notes, of the careful architecture of something she had told herself was not what it obviously was. She thought of Colt, 7 years ago, saying, "I'm sorry, Piper, I'm sorry. I didn't think it would touch you. I need you to stay at Keisha's," she said. "Don't go back until I tell you." She called Rowan from the stairwell. He picked up on the second ring. "Men at my apartment," she said. "Who are they? A beat. Short, sharp. When? My roommate saw them an hour ago." "Where are you now?" "Hospital." "I'm not going home." "No," he agreed. "You're not." A pause. "I'm sorry. This is my fault." She expected that sentence to break something open. Anger, fear, the retroactive horror of having sat across from him all those Thursday evenings while this was gathering somewhere outside her view. Instead, she felt something settle. The recognition again, not surprise. A door she had always known was in the room, finally opening. Tell me what's happening, she said. He did. His name, his family's name, was tangled in a dispute that had been building for 2 years. A man named Drexler controlled a competing operation out of Baltimore and had been pushing west for 18 months, absorbing or eliminating anyone who didn't fold. 3 of Rowan's associates had been hit in the last 6 weeks. The men at her apartment were a message, a pressure point. They know about you, he said. They've been watching. For how long? We don't know. She stood in the stairwell and listened to the sound of the hospital around her, the distant intercom, the wheels of a gurney, the constant low hum of a building that never slept. Can you move me somewhere? She said. Yes, Delia too. Already being arranged, she almost said. You were going to do it without asking. But she understood, in the way she had come to understand him, that he had not arranged it without asking. He had simply been certain she would ask, because he had, over 6 weeks of Thursday evenings, understood exactly who she was. Okay, she said. The safe house was in a residential neighborhood in the northwest of the city. Indistinguishable from the houses, on either side of it, gutters needed cleaning. One shutter slightly askew, the kind of deliberate ordinaries that Piper now understood was not neglect but intention. Mr. Foster brought her there in the black SUV, and Delia arrived an hour later in a different car, still holding her purse like a weapon. You had better explain everything, Delia said. Piper explained everything. Delia listened without interrupting, which was unusual for her. At the end she said, The man from the hospital, the one with the… Yes. Delia pressed her lips together. He's dangerous. Yes. And you've been seeing him for 6 weeks, having dinner, on Thursdays. Piper. I know. Delia was quiet for a moment. Then, is he going to fix this? Piper looked at the window, at the ordinary street, the ordinary afternoon light. We're going to fix it, she said, because the thing she hadn't told Rowan yet, the thing that had been sitting at the back of her mind since the stairwells, quiet and precise, taking shape with the particular clarity that came to her under pressure, was that she wasn't going to wait in a safe house. She had not spent 7 years watching her brother's case unravel to understand exactly how organizations like this worked, how they communicated, how they traced the connections between people, and then sit in a house with misaligned shutters and wait for a man to handle it. She had skills, not the kind written on her nursing license, the kind Colt had taught her in the 2 years between his release and her starting nursing school, when she had needed to understand the world he'd come back from, and he had needed to explain it to someone he trusted in case it ever mattered. It mattered now. She called Rowan that evening. The way Drexler is operating, she said. He's using pressure points, people adjacent to the primary targets, not direct confrontations. Yes, which means his intelligence is coming from somewhere close. He's not watching from a distance. He has a source. Silence. You've thought about this, he said. I've been thinking about it since the stairwell. She paused. I want to help. No, Rowan Piper. His voice was even. You're a nurse. I'm the daughter of a man who ran a numbers operation in Nashville for 11 years before he cooperated with a federal task force, she said. I'm the sister of someone who did 3 years and came out knowing exactly how information moves through organizations like yours. I was 17 when I started understanding how that worked, and I have not stopped learning since. A pause. I'm not asking your permission. I'm telling you what I have to offer. The silence that followed was different from his other silences. This one had weight in it, the weight of recalculation. What are you thinking? He said. It was not a question. Drexler has a source inside your organization. Someone close enough to know about me, a nurse at Mercy General, which means they've been monitoring your personal movements, not just your operations. That's not intelligence, that's surveillance. And surveillance at that level requires someone who has consistent access to your daily patterns. She let that sit. I can get close to whoever it is. Not as your associate, as what I actually am, a nobody in scrubs who makes terrible coffee and reads on her lunch break. Nobody looks twice at the nurse. Another silence. You'd be at risk, he said. I'm already at risk, she said. The difference is that this way it means something. She heard him breathe, that slow, controlled exhale, the one she had first noticed in the waiting room on the 4th floor, the one that meant he was hurting and had decided to keep moving anyway. "Tell me," he said, "exactly what you have in mind." What she had in mind took 4 days to execute. It started with a name. A man called Brennan, who served as a liaison between Rowan's operation and 3 of the city's independent distributors. He was careful, professional, unremarkable in every visible way. The kind of person you never suspected because you never thought about them long enough to suspect. Piper had noticed him once, in passing, at the restaurant, the way he had sat at the bar with his back to the room and his phone face down on the counter. Most people sat with their phone face up. People who were waiting for a message they didn't want seen sat with it face down. She had filed that away without knowing why. Now she knew why. The plan was simple in the way that good plans were always simple. She did not approach him as a threat, or as an investigator, or as anything that would trigger the particular animal alertness of a man who had learned to watch for both. She approached him as herself. Piper Callahan, nurse, unremarkable, carrying coffee and a paperback, finding a seat at the bar of a public restaurant on a Wednesday afternoon. She let him approach her. It took 20 minutes. She had expected 15. He was careful. "You come here often?" He said it with the self-aware irony of a man who knows the line is terrible and uses it anyway, which told her something about his confidence level. "Occasionally," she said. "The lamb here is worth the detour." They talked. She let him lead, let him feel like he was pulling information, which meant she controlled what he pulled. Her name, her job, her ordinary, unremarkable life. She mentioned Rowan's name once casually in a sentence about the hospital. She watched his eyes. There it was, the micro-flicker. Not of recognition, but of interest suddenly sharpened, and then immediately, deliberately, smoothed over. He was good. She was better. She left before he could ask for her number, which guaranteed he would spend the next 24 hours thinking about her. People wanted most what moved away from them. Then she went back to Rowan and told him everything. The 3 men Rowan sent to Brennan's apartment that night came back with confirmation of what they found on his phone, a secondary device, encrypted, with 2 weeks of location pings from Rowan's movements, and a Baltimore prefix on the last outgoing call. Drexler's number. What happened after that was not something Piper witnessed directly. She had been very clear on this point. She was not a soldier, had not claimed to be, did not intend to become one. What she had offered was intelligence, and she had delivered it. The rest belonged to Rowan's world in a way she had not asked to enter. She knew it was over when he came to the safe house at 11 o'clock on a Friday night, coat damp from the rain, and sat at the kitchen table with the particular stillness of someone who had been in motion for a very long time and had finally stopped. She made coffee, put it in front of him without asking. "Drexler," she said. Handled. She didn't ask what that meant. She thought she understood well enough. And Brennan, in federal custody. A pause. That part was simpler than expected. He decided to cooperate. She sat down across from him. "You're okay," she said. He looked at her for a long moment. The expression on his face was one she hadn't seen before. Not the careful assessment, not the controlled stillness, but something stripped back. Something that made him look, briefly, like someone who had been carrying a considerable weight for a very long time and had only just noticed how heavy it was. "You shouldn't have been in this," he said. "I know, I should have, Rowan," she said his name quietly. "I made my own choices. I've been making them this whole time." She paused. "I'm not your responsibility. I'm your—" She searched for the word. "I'm your Thursday evening. That's different." Something in his face shifted. That ghost again, the thing that wasn't quite a smile but lived close to it. "Thursday evening," he repeated. "Among other things." He looked at his coffee. The rain was coming down outside the ordinary house with the slightly misaligned shutter, in the ordinary neighborhood, and somewhere in the city a crisis had resolved that she had been, in her quiet and precise and completely underestimated way, instrumental in resolving. "Piper," he said. "Yes, I'd like you to stay. Not here," he gestured vaguely. "After, in general, in the—" He stopped, started again. I don't know the right word, she thought about it. Thursday evenings, she said, and the rest of it. He looked at her across the table. This man who had walked into the wrong waiting room, or maybe the right one, who had held himself completely still against pain and been seen anyway, who had sent her books with handwritten notes about passages she hadn't read yet, who had arranged for her safety before she thought to ask, and then let her walk into danger because she had been clear-eyed about her own capabilities, and he had been, in the end, wise enough to respect that. Yes, he said, that. Outside, the rain kept falling. Inside, the coffee was hot and the kitchen was quiet. And Piper Callahan, who had walked into a fourth-floor waiting room on a night when she was avoiding her supervisor, and thinking about leftover soup, sat across from Rowan Maddox and decided, with the same clarity she brought to everything else, that some doors were worth walking through.